is the Piper J3 Cub from A2A Simulations. A2A have made a bit of a name for themselves with extraordinarily detailed and accurate recreations of vintage aircraft, mainly warbirds, but more recently the Boeing 377 Stratocruiser. That's detailed and accurate in the simulation sense, by the way, not just in the appearance. In particular, what they've started to do is create upgrade packs for some of their aircraft, branded as accu-sim. The Cub's one of these aircraft, and it promises, among other things, very realistic modelling of the aerodynamics and of the engine system. I'm going to focus on the aerodynamics and the handling for this review. And I've got to say at the outset, this is a review only in the loosest sense of the word. To review this aircraft comprehensively in a short video is a completely unrealistic proposition. If I tell you this comes with a 120-page manual, and that's before you get into the accu-sim features, which are covered in a separate 47-page manual, should give you some idea of the complexity of this product. We're flying it into some real Cub country here, sticking under a couple of thousand feet, which puts us well below most of these hills. Strictly VFR, of course, low and slow, which is what the Cub does best. Anyway, right away it's clear that A2A have set themselves a real challenge with this project. The Piper Cub's about as stripped down as you can make an aeroplane and have it still be an aeroplane. It's got no lights, in fact no electrics at all apart from the ignition system. It's got minimal instrumentation. No electrics means no gyro instruments, by the way, so you fly everything with reference to the outside world. And this is where you really begin to appreciate the problems of recreating an authentic experience of flying something that in the real world's so physical to fly, so hands-on, when you can't actually reproduce any of those physical sensations. There's a clip you might have seen of Bob Hoover barrel rolling his Aero Commander twin with a glass of water sitting on top of the instrument panel. The point he's making is that, just like in a simple turn, if you fly this manoeuvre with rudder and ailerons properly coordinated, you'll continue to feel the one positive G all the way around with no significant lateral accelerations. The converse, obviously, is that if you're not coordinated, the water sloshes around and you're probably going to get wet. Now, your body feels those lateral forces as well, and they're part of your awareness of what the aircraft's doing. In a Piper Cub, they're a very big part of that awareness, which is why A2A have taken on such a challenge, really, in modelling this particular plane. Now, most aircraft have an instrument, a turn coordinator, to help you judge when you're using the right amount of rudder. In gliders, it's often just a piece of string tied onto the pitot tube. The Cub doesn't even have that. Well, not officially, anyway. But remember that glass of water. The compass in a Cub's basically well, you can think of it as a float sitting in a glass of water with a little pendulum underneath to keep it upright. Now what's interesting is that pendulum swings under the influence of any lateral forces, and you can see that because the compass tips. What you see in practice is the compass tips away from the sideways force, so like the uphill side of the compass tells you where to push the rudder, and if you can keep the compass more or less level, you're more or less coordinated. Of course, that's all very rough and ready, and it's not ideal to fixate on any instrument, particularly in such a hands-on aircraft as a Cub. So how have they managed to give us an aeroplane we can fly by feel when we can't actually feel? Well, what's really interesting with this model is in the way they've used sound. In the absence of any physical cues, they've put a lot of effort into capturing subtle audio cues to help us figure out what the aircraft's doing. And again, kind of like in real life, it's actually possible to fly the aircraft without reference to the instrument at all, just by paying attention to what you see and what you hear. Well, that's fine in principle, but let's check it out. I deliberately failed the airspeed indicator here, so we're not tempted to cheat, and we're going to fly a circuit. Now we've got a bit of a crosswind going on here. The radio's reporting 250 at 19. That's about 20 degrees off the nose. Using the clock rule, 20 minutes is about a third of an hour, so we get about a third of that as crosswind, 6 or 7 knots. Should be manageable, but we're probably going to need a bit of right rudder on the takeoff. Here we go, full power. Don't forget the airspeed indicator's not working. It's going to read whatever it was reading on the ground when I failed it. Holding the rudder to keep it straight there. Very significant headwind, has us off the ground almost immediately. We're going to turn crosswind pretty much before we get to the end of the runway as well. Flying a very tight circuit here, just for demonstration purposes obviously. Standing on the uphill side of that compass just to try and keep coordinated. Aiming point to that saddle in the hills over there. You can already see that wind's got us drifting fairly significantly sideways. It's not going to be a square circuit, a rectangular circuit by any means. Not going to spend long on the crosswind either. We're going to turn it straight in downwind. Kind of very roughly flying the headings. The headings are cardinal points, north, south, east and west in this circuit. Happily I'm just vaguely lining them up on the compass, but don't forget that compass bobs around an awful lot. Really flying with reference to what we can see, a few visual landmarks, but mainly just glancing back at the airfield. Again, making some effort to coordinate the turns using the compass as a turn coordinator, but when it's as bumpy as this, it's really pointless fixating on the instruments. It's also quite hazardous. We want to be looking outside the aircraft. So listening out for sounds here, and going to make it a bit easier. Going to chop the power here, cut the switches and glide it in. It's not something you'd normally do, but it does allow us to pay more attention to wind noise. Wind noise is audible above the engine sound, as you've noticed, but this is just to prove a point. Incidentally, that propeller is very handy if you are doing a dead stick approach. That propeller's windmilling is a very good clue to how fast you're going. It will stop a little bit above the stall speed, so we're looking about 40 miles per hour. The propeller will stop. As long as it doesn't stop, you've got a comfortable margin. You can see the wind noise is falling right off here, very gentle wind noise. Gives us a very good impression of speed. Touchdown. Stopped almost instantly there. Very good short field landing performance when you've got any significant headwind with this aircraft. So here's another opportunity to see how the sound details feed into your general impression of what the aircraft is doing. The Cub's a go anywhere kind of plane, of course, and we've got the Tundra tyres on this one, so it's fun to go exploring and land off the airport, especially with great scenery like this. Still got a fairly substantial crosswind here, so I'm working the rudder. I'm also having to stamp on the brakes to try and swing it round until we build up enough speed. And we're off, going for a bit of height first, then shoving the nose down to get a bit of speed, cracks the throttle, switches on, and there's the air start. It's not just about sounds, of course, and a lot of work's gone into how the controls feel. Now, I'm using feel very loosely here, obviously, in the sense of how much control input you need to get anything to happen. You're probably going to spend a lot of time flying the Cub quite slowly, and you're going to notice how much less responsive the controls are the slower you go. In other words, you need fairly large inputs for any effect from the controls. When you feel this in flight, it's a pretty good indication you're getting close to the stall. The stall itself is very well done. For a power off stall, you know you're getting close because it gets quieter, first of all. And there's a fairly subtle but also unmistakable buffet which you can see and hear, and which, if you don't back off, escalates into, I suppose, a sort of irritable shudder from the aircraft. Stalls, fairly uneventful unless you provoke it, by which I mean hold it in the stall. It basically pancakes and then gradually drops the nose, and it will recover by itself unless you deliberately prevent it from recovering. There's a fairly elegant way to descend pretty quickly by holding it just on the point of the stall, at which point inevitably what will happen is one or other of the wings will stall first and drop, and you need to be pretty quick and pick it up with the rudder, and then usually the opposite wing will stall. Now, fully developed, this is a manoeuvre called a falling leaf, or sometimes a rudder stall. Falling leaf gives a pretty good description of what it looks like, but this is also called an incipient spin. Not something you want to be doing close to the ground. Not going to say too much about spins beyond this, because this is as close as you ever want to be to spinning in normal operations, but the Cub will easily snap over onto its back in this situation. Classic accident, actually. One of the most common fatal accidents in aviation. Usually happens on the turn to final when you're distracted with lots of other things going on. So good to practice just so you can recognise it and catch it, because if you don't catch it before it flips over on its back, you're unlikely to get another chance. So the J3 Cub, all in all, great little aircraft. Of course, really only scratched the surface here. Said nothing about the fuel and engine system, carburettor icing model, hand starting, engine wear, lots of other stuff. Other variants as well, of course. Floats and skis, there's a whole other set of reviews right there. Lasting impressions are quality, attention to detail in every sense. Obviously a labour of love, and if you're going to do a pay-away aircraft, this is pretty much how to do it. Is it completely realistic? Well, no. It's probably about as realistic as we're going to get without full motion. Anyway, very nice aircraft. In my book, well worth the money.